There are moments in life that quietly rewrite everything you thought you knew. Not with noise, not with drama, but with a stillness so deep, it stays with you forever. Tonight, I want to share something that arrived in my inbox. A testimony from someone who passed through the edge of this world and came back carrying something rare. A piece that doesn't quite fit into ordinary words. If testimonies like this one help you slow down, breathe, and feel something real, you might feel right at home in this space. Before we begin, I'd love to know, what's your name and where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop it below. It means more than you know. Today's testimony was sent to me by email from Harold Eugene Simmons, and now, let's listen to what happened to him. Hello, my name is Harold Eugene Simmons, and what I experienced one quiet Tuesday changed how I see every single day I've been given since. I'm not a man who speaks much about personal things. I spent most of my life being practical, steady, the kind of person who fixes things with his hands and keeps feelings tucked somewhere private. But this I cannot keep quiet about. Not anymore. What I'm about to share with you is not something I fully understand even now, but I know it was real. More real than anything I had ever touched or held in 81 years of living. I remember that Tuesday, starting the way most of my mornings did, slowly, with the smell of coffee and the sound of birds outside my bedroom window. I live in a small house in rural Tennessee, the kind of place where the mornings arrive gently, without rushing you. My wife, Dorothea, had already gone out to tend the garden, and I sat at the kitchen table the way I always did, holding my mug with both hands. But something was different that morning, and I noticed it the way you notice a change in weather before the clouds arrive. A heaviness, not sadness exactly. More like the air itself had thickened around me. I tried to name it as I sat there. I thought maybe I hadn't slept well, or maybe it was the slight ache in my shoulders that had been visiting more often lately. I told myself it was nothing. That's what men of my generation do. We tell ourselves it's nothing and push forward. I got up, rinsed my mug, and moved toward the porch to sit in the morning light. The grass was still wet with dew, and I remember thinking how beautiful it looked, each blade carrying a tiny drop of light. That thought felt strangely important in the moment, though I couldn't have told you why. What I didn't know then was that my body had already begun a quiet conversation I wasn't part of. Something beneath the surface was shifting, the way deep water moves without disturbing what floats above it. I would only understand later that this heaviness wasn't just tiredness. It was something more like a threshold, the kind you don't notice until you've already crossed it. And as I settled into the porch chair, watching Dorothea move slowly between her rose bushes, I had no idea that within the hour, my awareness would slip somewhere I had no map for. Dorothea found me still in the chair, but no longer responding. She told me afterward that I looked peaceful, like I had simply drifted off mid-thought. There was no sound, no struggle, just stillness where there had been a living, breathing man moments before. She called for help, and what followed was the blur of sirens and urgent voices that I, of course, was not present for. I was somewhere else entirely by then, though somewhere isn't quite the right word for it. It was more like I had slipped out of the frequency of the physical world, the way a radio signal fades when you drive too far from the station. I have no memory of the transition itself. One moment I was watching my wife among her roses, and the next I was simply elsewhere. There was no darkness, no tunnel in the way people often describe. For me, it was more like waking up inside a room you've never seen before but somehow already know. a kind of recognition without explanation. My body was not with me, and yet I didn't feel incomplete. That's the part that surprises people most when I describe it. You'd think the absence of a body would feel like loss, but it didn't feel like loss at all. It felt like setting down something very heavy you'd been carrying for a long, long time. The medical team worked on me for several minutes. I was told this later in fragments, the way people tell you things they're not sure you can handle. My heart had entered a pause that the monitors registered clearly. Clinically, I was gone. And yet, from where I was more present, more alert, more fully myself than I had ever been in all my 8 decades of living. There's a strange irony in that the moment my body stopped responding was the moment I felt most awake, most seen, most arrived somewhere I had only ever visited, in the words of one very old and familiar psalm. The first thing I became aware of was silence. But please understand, this was not the absence of sound. I've sat in quiet rooms. I've stood in empty fields at midnight. I know the silence of this world, and it has edges. It has a quality of waiting, like it could be broken at any moment. This silence was different. It had no edges. It didn't wait, because it had no need to. It simply was, fully and completely, the way mountains simply are. It surrounded me without pressing. It held me without gripping. And inside it, I felt something I can only describe as being recognized, as if the silence itself knew my name. I noticed slowly that I still had a sense of awareness, of thought, of feeling, but they were no longer tangled together the way they usually are in a living body. In life, thought and feeling rush in on top of each other constantly. Worry interrupts wonder. Pain interrupts peace. But here, each sense arrived cleanly, one at a time, like notes played carefully on an instrument. I became aware of a softness beneath me, not a floor exactly, but something that received me, and a head, or what I understood as a head. There was a quality of light that didn't behave the way earthly light does. It didn't come from a source. It simply existed, spread evenly, warm without heat, bright without glare. What struck me most in those first moments wasn't the grandeur of it. It was the familiarity. That is the detail I've struggled most to explain to people since returning. I expected strangeness. I expected to feel disoriented, out of place. Instead, I felt something closer to the feeling of returning to a childhood home after many years away. The proportions of things feel slightly different from how you remembered, but the belonging is immediate. Bone deep. I whispered something in my mind, not words exactly, but the feeling of a question. Is this? And before the question could fully form, something answered, not with words, not yet, but with a warmth that said, simply and completely, yes. And I want you to know, what came next is the part I've carried most carefully inside me since returning. Ahead in my story, there is a moment where that light began to take on a quality I recognized from somewhere ancient, somewhere I had read about 100 times without fully understanding. As I go deeper into what I experienced, you'll hear about a valley, a table, and a presence that made 81 years of questions finally feel answered. I didn't know then that what I was walking into was the lived interior of words I had known since childhood. Words I had spoken at funerals and quiet evenings, without ever imagining I might one day find myself inside them. At some point, I became aware that I was moving, not walking in the way my old legs used to carry me, more like being moved, the way a boat is carried by a current it trusts completely, and the landscape around me, I can only describe it as a valley, But again, earthly words fail here. It had depth and dimension, a sense of downward curve on either side, with something like hills rising gently in the periphery. The colors were not colors I can name, richer than anything I have seen here, but not loud. They had a quality of being deeply, quietly themselves, the way old wood has a color that cheap paint can never replicate. What moved through me as I traveled this valley was not fear. I want to be clear about that, because the word valley carries shadows for most people. We associate it with low places, dark places, places of struggle. But what I felt moving through this one was something closer to solemnity, a holy seriousness, like walking into a cathedral, where you instinctively lower your voice, not because you're afraid, but because something in you recognizes that this space deserves your reverence. I felt my whole history with me, not as a burden, but as a record. Every year of my life was present in some form, folded quietly into the journey. There was one detail about that valley that I have never fully shared until now, and it is this. I was not alone in it, but I could not yet see who was with me. I could sense a presence the way you sense another person in a dark room before your eyes adjust, a warmth from a direction, a quality to the air that changes when someone is near. I kept wanting to turn and look, but something in me understood that turning wasn't necessary. The presence was not behind me or beside me. It was more like it was woven into the atmosphere of the valley itself, patient, unhurried, waiting for me to simply notice. The moment I stopped trying to locate the presence was the moment it became fully clear to me, not visually, not at first, but in the way it felt. There was a quality of attention being directed at me that I can only describe as shepherding. A careful, personal, completely unhurried attention. The kind a good shepherd gives to a single sheep. Not the crowd, not the flock as a whole, but this one. This wandering, tired, aging one. I had read the 23rd Psalm more times than I could count. I had read it at my mother's bedside. I had read it at my brother's funeral. I had read it alone in dark seasons of my life. But I had never felt it before. Not like this. The presence moved with me without crowding me. That's another detail I find hard to explain. In life, when someone walks closely beside you, there is always a slight adjustment, a negotiation of space. This was nothing like that. The presence added to my space rather than taking from it. I felt larger somehow, more complete, as if something that had always been slightly missing from my experience of being alive had quietly slipped back into place. And with it came a particular knowing, a transmission that wasn't words, but carried more information than words usually do. It said something like, "I have always been this close. Every step you ever took, I was this close." I thought about the years I had felt alone, and there were many. After my son moved far away, after my brother passed, after the years when Dorothea and I went through a long, quiet, cold season in our marriage that we never quite spoke about openly. I had carried a low hum of loneliness through so much of my life, a sense that the gap between me and others was just slightly too wide to fully close. And here, in this valley with this presence moving beside me, that hum simply stopped, not gradually, all at once, like a machine you've grown so used to that you only notice it when it finally switches off. The silence that replaced it was the most peaceful silence I have ever known. I had lived with fear for a long time without fully admitting it. Not dramatic fear, not the kind that shouts, the quiet kind, the fear that things would fall apart when I wasn't looking, the fear that I had made too many mistakes to be fully acceptable, the fear of being a burden to Dorothea in my final years, the fear of what waits on the other side of this life, that old, persistent question that lives in the background of every human consciousness, no matter how faith-filled or practical a person is. I had faith, real faith, but underneath it, that fear had always found a way to persist. A splinter you can't quite locate but always feel. What happened to that fear in this place was not dramatic. It didn't evaporate in a flash. It was more like watching ice thaw, slowly, steadily. The things I had been unconsciously tensing against simply had nothing left to push against. The presence beside me carried no judgment, no disappointment, no running tally of everything I had gotten wrong. I had expected, if I'm honest, some version of an accounting, some moment where the weight of my failures would be placed on a scale. Instead, what I encountered was something that had no interest in prosecution at all. It was only interested in me, in Harold, not in my record, in me. There is one particular fear I released in that valley that I didn't even know I was carrying until it left. A fear about time. All my life I had felt the press of time, the sense that there wasn't quite enough of it, that I was always slightly behind where I should be. Even in retirement, even in the slow mornings and long evenings, time still felt like something chasing. But in that valley, time as I understood it simply didn't exist. And its absence didn't leave a hole. It left room. A vast, unhurried room in which everything that had ever mattered to me was still present, not past, not lost, simply held, the way a careful hand holds something precious. Then I saw it, or rather, I became aware of it, because seeing doesn't quite capture the fullness of how perception worked in that place. A table, not a grand banquet table stretching into the distance, something more intimate than that. A table sized for presence, for closeness, for real conversation. It was set with a care that moved something deep in me. The kind of setting that communicates, I knew you were coming. I have been preparing for you. Every detail of it carried personal knowledge, as if whoever had arranged it understood not just my hunger, but the specific shape of it, the specific things I had gone without, the specific longings I had never spoken aloud. I sat, or I was received into sitting. The distinction feels important somehow. And the moment I was seated, the presence that had accompanied me through the valley became more specifically located, across from me, present in a way that was no longer ambient and atmospheric, but focused and personal. And though I struggle to describe what I perceived visually, what I can describe is the quality of being looked at, of being seen by eyes that carried no agenda except love, no evaluation, no comparison to who I should have been, just knowledge, complete, quiet, loving knowledge of exactly who I was. I had never in my life been looked at quite like that. What was placed before me at that table was not food in the ordinary sense. It was more like the answers to questions I had been carrying for decades, offered one by one, gently, at a pace that didn't overwhelm. I understood things sitting at that table that I had been circling my entire life without arriving at. Not theological arguments, not doctrinal certainties, but the quiet interior knowings that only come when something in you finally stops resisting. Why suffering had visited my family the way it did. Why certain prayers had been answered in ways I hadn't recognized as answers. Why the long, slow years had been as necessary as the bright ones. Each understanding arrived like a warm hand placed over an old ache. Some testimonies don't just move you. They reach into a place inside you that you forgot was still tender. Tonight is one of those nights. What you're about to hear comes from someone who has lived nearly a century, and in one quiet afternoon, crossed a threshold that changed everything she understood about grief, about tears, and about being truly seen. If testimonies like this one give you permission to feel things you've been holding too long, you'll find yourself very much at home here. Before we begin, tell me something. What is your name? And what part of the world are you resting in tonight? I genuinely want to know. Today's testimony was sent to me by email from Margaret Irene Calloway. And now, let's listen to what happened to her. Hello, my name is Margaret Irene Calloway, and what I experienced one quiet afternoon at the age of 98 changed the way I understand every single year I have lived, every loss I have carried, and every tear I ever thought disappeared unnoticed into the dark. 98 years is a long time to be a person. I don't say that with complaint. I say it with the particular knowledge that only comes from having actually lived that many seasons. You accumulate things over that kind of time, not just memories, but weight. The specific weight of grief that never fully resolved, of people you loved who left before you were ready, of words you wished you had said, and words you said that you wished you could take back. I had been carrying all of it for so long that I had stopped noticing the heaviness. It had simply become the shape of me. I was born in 1926 in a small town in coastal Georgia, the kind of town where everyone knew your grandmother's name and the church bell set the rhythm of the week. I had outlived my husband by 19 years, outlived 2 of my children, outlived most of the people who had known me when I was young and unguarded. There is a particular loneliness in that kind of survival, a loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone in a room. It has to do with being the last keeper of certain memories, the last one who remembers how a particular person laughed, or the exact color of a dress worn to a dance 70 years ago. By 98, I had made a kind of peace with all of it. Or I thought I had. I had learned to hold my losses quietly, to smile at photographs without letting the ache show too clearly. My granddaughter used to say I was the strongest person she knew. I accepted that description graciously. But privately, I knew that what looked like strength was sometimes just practice. Practice at carrying things without buckling. Practice at keeping the weight distributed evenly enough that no one could see how much there actually was. What I didn't know was that I had never truly set any of it down, not until that afternoon. It was a Wednesday. I remember that specifically. Wednesdays in my household had always been quiet days. My granddaughter Lily had brought me lunch the way she did most afternoons. A simple thing, soup and bread, eaten at the small table near the window that looked out over her back garden. We talked about ordinary things, the neighbors, a film she had watched, whether the tomatoes in the garden were coming in properly this year. The conversation was warm and unhurried, the kind that doesn't need to go anywhere in particular to be worth having. I told her the soup was the best thing I'd tasted all week. She laughed and said that wasn't saying much. After she cleared the dishes, I settled into my chair by the window. I had a particular way of sitting in the afternoons. Slightly reclined, a blanket across my lap, even in warmer weather, because my bones had decided somewhere in my 80s that they preferred warmth at all times. I had a book open on my lap. I don't remember what it was. I remember the quality of the light more than anything else. It was that particular late afternoon gold that arrives in autumn, low and generous, filling the room sideways. I remember thinking, what a beautiful light. And then, without ceremony, without any sense of alarm, something in me simply let go. I didn't feel unwell. That's the detail people find most surprising when I describe it. There was no warning sensation, no sudden discomfort. My body just grew still in a way that went beyond ordinary rest. The way a clock sometimes winds all the way down between one tick and the next, without fuss. Lily found me a short time later and understood immediately that something had changed. The sequence of events that followed, the ambulance, the medical voices, the equipment. I was entirely absent from all of it. My awareness had already moved somewhere else entirely, somewhere that had nothing to do with soup or autumn light, or the question of whether tomatoes were coming in properly. The first thing I became aware of was the absence of the weight. After 98 years of carrying it, the absence was so startling that it took me a long moment to understand what was different. It was like suddenly noticing that a sound you had grown completely accustomed to had stopped. Not a dramatic silence, just a new quality to the air. My body was not with me, and yet I was more fully present than I had been in years, more alert, more completely here, wherever here was. And the very first thing I felt in that new alertness was lightness. A physical but not physical lightness, the kind that made 98 years of accumulated weight feel like something that had simply been set down by a careful hand. I became aware of my surroundings gradually, the way your eyes adjust when you move from a dimly lit room into gentle daylight. There was no dramatic reveal, just a slowly increasing clarity. What I perceived around me was not darkness, not a tunnel, not anything that matched the descriptions I'd occasionally read about in books over the years. It was more like arriving into a space that had been expecting me, a quality of reception, of preparedness. The atmosphere itself seemed to hold a kind of attentiveness, as if everything in it was oriented gently toward my arrival. And beneath all of it, a quiet that was deeper than any quiet I had known on earth. Not empty, deeply, actively full. The detail that surprised me most in those first moments was this. I could sense the presence of love before I could identify its source. Not love as an emotion, love as a substance, a quality in the atmosphere itself, the way warmth is a quality of sunlight that you feel before you understand the physics of it. It surrounded me without pressing. It was interested in me without being intrusive. And somewhere within it, I became aware of something specific moving toward me. Not rushing, not performing, just coming. With all the patience of something that has never once been in a hurry. And I felt, very quietly, that whatever was coming had been moving toward me for a very long time. I want you to stay with me here, because ahead in my story, what I encountered was not what I had spent 98 years imagining. It was quieter than I expected, more personal than I could have prepared for. As I go deeper into what I experienced, you'll hear about a moment when something happened to the grief I had been carrying since my daughter passed in 1987. A grief I thought had simply become part of my permanent architecture. What was done with that grief, and how it was done, is the part of this testimony I have the most difficulty putting into ordinary words. But I will try, because I believe some of you listening tonight are carrying something similar, and perhaps what happened to mine will say something to yours. The warmth arrived before anything else became clear, and I want to try to describe it accurately, because it was unlike any warmth I had known on Earth. Physical warmth, the warmth of a fire, a blanket, a hand held in yours. It warms the surface first and works inward. This warmth worked from the inside out. It began somewhere I can only describe as the center of my awareness and moved outward from there, through every layer of me, through every memory, through every year. And as it moved, it carried with it a single unmistakable message. You are known here, not tolerated, not processed, known, the way a mother knows a child she has carried. I had come home to places before in my 98 years, to the house I grew up in as a girl whenever I visited, to the church where I was married whenever I attended a wedding there in later years, to the kitchen table of my own home after long trips away. Each of those homecomings carried its own particular warmth, a recognition, a belonging. But this was all of those layered together and then multiplied by something I have no number for. It wasn't nostalgic. It was more fundamental than nostalgia. It was the feeling of arriving at the original place, the first place, the place that all other belonging had been quietly pointing toward without knowing it. There was a detail about this welcoming warmth that I only understood later in reflection. It didn't treat me as I was at 98, frail, slow, carrying the particular tiredness of extreme old age. It received me as something more complete than that, as if all my ages were present at once, the girl of 7, the young bride of 22, the mother, the widow, the great-grandmother, all of them held together and welcomed as a whole. I had spent much of my later years feeling reduced by age, feeling that the world saw an old woman and missed the fuller person beneath. In this welcoming, nothing was missed. Every version of me was present and accounted for, and all of it was received with the same uncomplicated, unhurried love. And then something happened that I have spent the years since returning trying to find adequate language for. As that warmth settled fully into me, I became aware of something moving across my face. Not hands exactly, not in the physical sense, but something that carried the intention and the gentleness of hands, something that moved with the specific care of someone performing an act of tenderness they have been wanting to perform for a long time. And what it was doing was wiping, gently, deliberately, completely. And what it was wiping away were tears, not tears that were falling in that moment. Something deeper than that, the residue of tears, the marks left behind by a lifetime of grief. I cannot tell you how I knew that's what was happening. It wasn't something I reasoned my way to. It was simply immediately understood, the way you understand certain things in dreams without needing them explained. Every tear I had ever cried was somehow present in that moment, not replaying, not causing pain, but being acknowledged, being seen, being specifically, individually attended to. The tears for my husband in his final weeks. The tears I cried alone after my daughter passed, and I thought I would not survive the following month. The quiet, private tears I cried on certain anniversaries when I sat in the garden and missed people so specifically that their absence had a shape. What moved me most about this experience wasn't the wiping itself. It was the implication of it. To wipe something away, you must first have seen it. You must have been present for it. Every tear I had shed in private, in bathrooms, in parked cars, in the middle of the night when grief visited without warning, had been witnessed, not observed from a distance, witnessed in the way you witness something you care about deeply. And what that meant was that not one of those moments of pain had occurred in true solitude. Not one. The loneliness I had felt in my darkest hours had been a perception, not a reality. Someone had been there for all of it, seeing it, holding it, waiting for this moment to address it properly. Over the course of a long life, you learn to manage grief by layering. Each new loss arrives, and because there is no time or space to fully process it, you place it carefully beneath the surface and continue functioning. This is not weakness. It is how people survive, how mothers continue cooking breakfast the week after a funeral, how widows learn to sleep alone in a bed that still remembers two people. I had become, through decades of practice, extraordinarily skilled at this layering. I could smile at Christmas dinner with my grandchildren while carrying, beneath that smile, losses they didn't know about and griefs I had never named aloud to anyone. In that place, the layers began to surface. Not all at once, not in a way that overwhelmed. More like the way sediment shifts slowly when still water is gently disturbed. Faces rose first. My mother, who passed when I was 31 and whom I had needed for another 67 years without her. My oldest son, Thomas, who left us at 54 from an illness that moved too quickly for any of us to properly say what needed saying. My closest friend from girlhood, a woman named Cecilia, who I had not thought about in years, but whose absence I apparently had never stopped feeling. Each face arrived quietly, and with each one, something in me that had been compressed began, very gently, to release. The unusual thing about this surfacing was that it did not feel like reopening wounds. The grief came up differently than it had gone down. It came up already held, already accompanied by something that understood its full weight and was not burdened by it. It was the difference between carrying something alone in the dark and carrying it alongside someone with a steadier footing and a lamp. The loss didn't disappear. I want to be honest about that. I still knew these people were gone from this life. But the quality of the grief transformed. It shifted from the kind that isolates to the kind that connects, from a weight that pressed down to something that opened upward. There was a particular sorrow I had carried since 1987 that I had privately classified as permanent. My daughter, Eleanor. She was 59 when she passed, and I was 79, and the wrongness of that order never left me. There is something a mother's body knows about outliving a child that cannot be fully explained to someone who hasn't experienced it. It rewrites your understanding of what is supposed to happen. It leaves a specific kind of mark that doesn't fade with time. It simply becomes familiar. I had Eleanor's photograph on my bedside table for 19 years. I said goodnight to it every evening, not because I thought she could hear, but because the ritual was the only shape left that my love for her could take. When Eleanor surfaced in that place, the experience was not what I would have predicted. I had imagined in my more hopeful moments that if there was anything beyond this life, I might see her again. But what I encountered was not a reunion in the way that word usually means. It was more like a transmission, a specific knowing that arrived complete and whole, that communicated everything I had needed to know about where she was, about whether she had been held, about whether the love between us had survived the crossing. I cannot translate the content of that knowing into sentences, but I can tell you that it addressed every specific thing I had worried about in 19 years of missing her. Not one concern was left unattended. The dissolving happened after that knowing arrived. The sorrow I had classified as permanent began very quietly to change its nature. It didn't vanish. It transformed. The part of it that was fear that she had suffered, fear that she had been alone, fear that love ended at the border of this life. That part dissolved completely. What remained was pure, uncomplicated love, freed from the weight of uncertainty that had been pressing on it for nearly 2 decades. And grief without fear, I discovered, is a completely different substance. Lighter, cleaner, something you can hold without bracing. I had not known until that moment how much of what I called grief was actually fear wearing grief's clothing. At some point in all of this, the presence that had been accompanying everything became more directly focused, more personally present. And what I perceived, and I want to be careful here to speak only of my own experience, was something I can only describe as Jesus. Not a theological concept, not an image from a painting, a presence that was specific and personal and carried a quality of knowing that went far beyond anything I had encountered in human relationship. He seemed to know me the way you know a piece of music you have loved for your entire life. Every note, every pause, every place where it swells and every place where it goes quiet. What struck me most about this presence was its relationship to my tears specifically. Not to my achievements, not to my service record, if I can call it that, the years of church attendance, the charitable work, the ways I had tried to be good. None of that seemed to be the point. The point was the tears. Each specific tear from each specific moment seemed to be known the way a librarian knows their collection. Not just acknowledged in aggregate, but individually understood. This one from 1953, when I sat in a hospital waiting room. This one from 1971, at a graveside in the rain. This one from last Tuesday, quietly, over breakfast, for no reason I could name except the accumulated weight of a very long life.